They say the loudest sound in the world isn't a gunshot or a scream. It's the silence that fills a room right after a mistake that can never be undone. Officer Bill Higgins thought he was the law in Preston Creek. He thought the badge on his chest made him a god. But on a rainy Tuesday inside a roadside diner, Higgins made a calculation that would cost him everything. He saw a 14-year-old boy and saw a suspect. He didn't see the man standing quietly in the doorway behind him, a man who hunts predators for a living. This is the story of how one arrogant power trip turned into a federal nightmare. The rain in Preston Creek didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime stick harder. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind where the sky turns a bruised purple before settling into pitch black. Inside Betty's 24-hour stop, the fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing buzz, flickering every time the old refrigerator compressor kicked on. In the back booth, far away from the door, sat Skylar Banks. Skylar was 14, though he had the height of a varsity basketball player and the soft, rounded face of a kid who still watched cartoons on Saturday mornings. He wore a slightly oversized grey hoodie and expensive noise-cancelling headphones. On the table in front of him wasn't a weapon, or drugs, or stolen cash. It was an AP history textbook, a plate of half-eaten cheese fries, and a sleek, silver MacBook Pro that looked out of place on the sticky laminate table. He was typing furiously, his brow furrowed. The deadline for his paper on the Industrial Revolution was midnight, and the Wi-Fi at the motel down the road where he and his dad were staying was garbage. Betty's diner had the best connection in town. "You need a refill, honey." Betty, a woman in her 60s with hair the color of tobacco smoke, hovered over him with a coffee pot. Skylar slid one ear cup off. "No, thank you, Mom. Just water, if that's okay. My dad should be back in a second. He's just on a call outside." "Suit yourself, sugar." Betty waddled away, the rubber soles of her orthopedic shoes squeaking on the linoleum. The bell above the door jingled. The atmosphere in the diner shifted instantly. It wasn't a subtle change. It was a drop in pressure, the kind that makes your ears pop. 2 police officers walked in. The first was Officer Jenny Tate. She was young, maybe 24, with a ponytail pulled too tight and eyes that darted around nervously. She looked like she was still trying to convince herself she belonged in the uniform. The second was Sergeant Bill Higgins. Higgins was a local legend, but not the good kind. He was built like a vending machine, square, heavy, and immovable. His uniform was tailored tight around his biceps, and his thumb rested perpetually on his belt, just inches from his service weapon. He had a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite and left out in the rain, pockmarked, red, and hard. In Preston Creek, Higgins didn't enforce the law. He decided what the law was, depending on his mood. And tonight, Higgins was in a foul mood. "Coffee, black, to go." Higgins barked at Betty without making eye contact. He scanned the room, his eyes acting like twin searchlights, hunting for a reason to escalate his night. The diner was mostly empty. A trucker slept in the corner booth. An elderly couple ate pie in silence near the window. And then, there was Skylar. Higgins's gaze stopped. It locked onto the boy in the grey hoodie. He saw the headphones. He saw the expensive laptop. He saw the black teenager, sitting alone in a town that wasn't known for its diversity. Higgins nudged Tate. "Check it out," he muttered, loud enough for the elderly couple to hear. "What?" Tate asked, following his gaze. "The kid?" "That's a $2,000 computer," Higgins said, his voice dropping to a gravelly growl. "And that kid looks like he shops at the Goodwill bin. Math don't add up." "Sarge, come on," Tate whispered, sensing trouble. "He's doing homework. Let's just get the coffee." Property crime is up 15% in this sector, Tate. That looks like the laptop reported stolen from the university campus last week. The university is 40 miles away, Sarge. Criminals travel, Tate. Watch and learn. Higgins didn't walk over to the booth. He prowled. He hitched his belt up and marched across the diner floor, his boots thudding, heavy and deliberate. He wanted the noise. He wanted the intimidation. Schuyler didn't hear him coming. The noise-cancelling headphones were doing their job, playing a lo-fi hip-hop track that helped him focus. He was typing a sentence about the steam engine when a shadow fell across his screen. He looked up. For a second, Schuyler wasn't scared. He was confused. He saw a wall of blue uniform and a badge that caught the fluorescent light. He saw a face that was twisted into a sneer of predetermined guilt. Higgins tapped the table, hard, 1, 2, 3 times with his knuckle. Schuyler scrambled to pull his headphones down around his neck. "So, sir? That's a nice machine you got there, son," Higgins said. It wasn't a compliment. It was an accusation, wrapped in a southern drawl. "Oh, thanks," Schuyler said, his voice cracking slightly. He sat up straighter, trying to make himself look smaller, less threatening. His dad had given him the talk a dozen times. Be polite. Keep your hands visible. Don't argue. Mind telling me where a kid like you gets the cash for a rig like that? Higgins leaned in, placing both hands on the table, boxing Schuyler in. "It was a gift," Schuyler said softly. "From my dad." Higgins let out a short, barking laugh. He looked back at Officer Tate, who was standing by the counter, looking uncomfortable. "A gift, you hear that, Tate? Daddy Warbucks bought it for him." Higgins turned back to Schuyler, his smile vanishing. "Let's see a receipt." I don't carry the receipt," Schuyler stammered. "I'm just doing homework." "Homework," Higgins repeated, as if the word was foreign. He reached out, his thick fingers hovering over the laptop. "Open the settings. Show me the user profile. If it's yours, it'll have your name on it." Schuyler hesitated. "Sir, am I doing something wrong? I really just want to finish my paper." That was the wrong thing to say. To a man like Bill Higgins, asserting rights was the same as confessing guilt. The air in the diner grew thin. The trucker in the corner had woken up and was watching. Betty had stopped pouring coffee, the pot trembling in her hand. "You getting smart with me, boy?" Higgins's voice dropped an octave. The vein in his neck, thick as a garden hose, began to throb. "No, sir," Schuyler said, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. I know my rights. I don't have to unlock my computer unless you have a warrant or probable cause." Higgins's face turned a shade of violet that would have been comical if it weren't so terrifying. He wasn't used to no. In Preston Creek, no was a word people whispered after he left the room. "Probable cause?" Higgins spat the words out. "I see a juvenile in possession of high-value electronics that fit the description of stolen property. That is my probable cause. Now stand up." "Sarge." Officer Tate took a step forward, her hand raising slightly. "Maybe we can just run the serial number on the back if you're really worried." "Quiet, Tate," Higgins snapped without looking at her. He kept his eyes locked on Schuyler. "I gave you a lawful order. Stand up. Hands on your head." Schuyler looked toward the front window, praying to see his dad's rental car. It was still there, the engine running, wipers slapping back and forth. "Where are you, Dad?" "I'm not standing up," Schuyler said, his voice trembling but firm. He gripped the edge of the table. "I haven't done anything. Please just leave me alone." Higgins didn't wait. He didn't de-escalate. He lunged. His hand, the size of a catcher's mitt, shot out and grabbed Schuyler by the front of his hoodie. The fabric bunched tight against Schuyler's throat, cutting off his breath. With a violent jerk, Higgins hauled the 14-year-old out of the booth. Skylar's legs tangled in the table legs. The laptop slid, teetered on the edge, and crashed to the floor with a sickening crunch of glass and aluminum. "No!" Skylar yelled, instinctively reaching for his computer. "Stop resisting!" Higgins roared. It was the magic phrase cops like him used to justify whatever came next. He spun Skylar around, slamming him chest first into the laminate table. The ketchup bottle toppled over, rolling onto the floor. Skylar gasped as the air left his lungs. "You're making a mistake!" Skylar wheezed, his cheek pressed against the sticky table. "My dad—" "I don't care who your daddy is unless he's down here to bail your ass out," Higgins growled. He grabbed Skylar's right arm and wrenched it behind his back, twisting it high up toward his shoulder blades. Skylar cried out in pain. "You're hurting me!" "Then stop fighting," Higgins lied. Skylar wasn't fighting. He was limp, terrified, trying not to break his arm. Officer Tate rushed over, her face pale. "Sarge, ease up! He's a kid! He's a suspect, Tate. Get the cuffs!" "Sarge, look at him, he's terrified," Tate pleaded, putting a hand on Higgins's shoulder. Higgins shoved her hand away. "I said get the cuffs, or I write you up for insubordination." Skylar had tears streaming down his face now. The humiliation was worse than the pain. The elderly couple was whispering, looking at him like he was a criminal. He felt the cold steel of the handcuffs bite into his wrists. Click, click. Higgins yanked Skylar upright, spinning him around. He grabbed Skylar by the back of the neck, his fingers digging into the soft skin there, forcing Skylar's head down. "You think you can come into my town with your fancy toys and your attitude?" Higgins hissed into Skylar's ear. "I'm going to process you, impound that laptop, and toss you in a holding cell until you age out of the system." Higgins began to march Skylar toward the door. Skylar stumbled, his feet dragging. He looked at the shattered laptop on the floor. His entire semester's work, his photos, gone. "Move it!" Higgins shoved him forward. They were halfway to the door when the bell jingled again. A man stepped in. He was soaking wet. He wore a faded Carhartt jacket, muddy work boots, and a beanie pulled low. He looked rough, a day laborer or maybe a drifter. He had a scruffy beard and tired eyes. It was Raymond Banks. He stopped in the entryway, wiping rain from his face. He looked up and saw the scene. He saw the shattered laptop. He saw the terrified face of his son. He saw the massive hand of Officer Higgins clamped onto the back of Skylar's neck. The diner went silent again. But this silence was different. It wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of a predator entering the territory of a scavenger. Raymond didn't yell. He didn't run. He just stood there, blocking the exit, his hands hanging loosely by his sides. "Officer," Raymond said. His voice was calm, terrifyingly level. It sounded like gravel grinding on steel. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. You might want to let go of my son." Higgins stopped. He looked the newcomer up and down, sizing him up. He saw the muddy boots, the cheap jacket. He saw another nobody. Higgins sneered. "This your delinquent? Step aside, sir, or you'll be joining him in the back of the cruiser for obstruction." Raymond didn't move. He didn't blink. He took one slow step forward. "I'm not asking," Raymond said. The silence in Betty's diner stretched so tight it felt like a piano wire wrapped around everyone's throat. Sergeant Higgins stared at Raymond Banks, trying to reconcile the image of this disheveled, muddy man with the steely authority in his voice. Higgins's brain, conditioned by 20 years of bullying locals, defaulted to its standard operating procedure. Intimidation. Obstruction? Higgins laughed, a harsh, grating sound. He shifted his grip on Skylar's neck, making the boy wince. "Buddy, you just stepped into a felony. I don't know who you think you are, dragging mud into my diner. But you have exactly 3 seconds to get out of my face before I introduce you to the pavement." Raymond didn't blink. He didn't look at the gun on Higgins's hip or the terrified Officer Tate. He looked directly into Higgins's eyes. "That boy is 14 years old. He has no criminal record. He is an honor roll student, and he is my son. You are hurting him. I'm telling you, as a father and a concerned citizen, let him go." "One," Higgins counted, stepping forward, dragging Skylar with him. "Dad, please, just go," Skylar cried out, tears cutting tracks through the dust on his face. "He's going to hurt you." "It's okay, Skylar," Raymond said softly, never breaking eye contact with the sergeant. "He's not going to hurt anyone else tonight." "Two," Higgins barked. He reached for his baton with his free hand, the telescoping metal snapping open with a violent clack. "You want to bleed, hobo? Is that it?" "Officer Tate," Raymond said, shifting his gaze to the young rookie. "You have a duty to intervene when your partner uses excessive force. This is your moment to save your career. Tell him to stand down." Tate froze. She looked at the baton, then at Raymond's calm demeanor. "Sarge, maybe we should just—" "Shut up, Tate," Higgins roared. "Three." Higgins released Skylar's neck and swung. It was a vicious, overhead strike meant to crack a collarbone or split a scalp. Against a drunk or a scared teenager, it would have ended the fight. But Raymond Banks wasn't a drunk. The movement that followed was so fast, the elderly couple in the corner missed it entirely. Raymond didn't retreat. He stepped into the swing. His left arm shot up in a rigid block, catching Higgins' forearm, halting the baton inches from impact. Before Higgins could register the shock, Raymond's right hand lashed out. He didn't punch. He struck Higgins' brachial plexus, the bundle of nerves in the neck, with a precise, chopping motion. Higgins's arm went numb. The baton clattered to the floor. "What the—" Higgins gasped, stumbling back. Raymond flowed like water. He swept Higgins's right leg, driving the big man's face into the linoleum with a heavy thud. In a heartbeat, Raymond was on top of him, his knee pressed firmly between Higgins's shoulder blades, pinning him to the ground. He grabbed Higgins's right wrist, the one reaching for his gun, and torqued it upward in a joint lock that threatened to snap the radius bone. "Ah! My arm!" Higgins screamed, his face mashed against the dirty floor, right next to the spilled milkshake. Officer Tate panicked. Her training kicked in, shaky and adrenaline-fueled. She fumbled for her service weapon, drawing it and pointing it at Raymond's head. "Get off him!" Tate shrieked, her voice cracking. "Get off him right now! Hands in the air!" The diner was deadly silent again. Raymond Banks was kneeling on a police sergeant, while a rookie cop pointed a Glock 17 at his temple. Skylar was huddled against the booth, sobbing quietly. "Officer Tate," Raymond said. His voice hadn't raised a decibel. He wasn't panting. He sounded like he was giving a lecture. "Finger off the trigger. You are trembling. If you fire, you will likely miss and hit the gas line behind the counter, or the civilian in the booth. Holster your weapon." "I said get off him!" Tate yelled, tears of panic welling in her eyes. "You're under arrest." "I am not under arrest," Raymond said, "and neither is my son." Slowly, deliberately, Raymond moved his left hand, the one not twisting Higgins' wrist, toward the inside pocket of his muddy Carhartt jacket. "Don't move, I'll shoot," Tate warned. "I am reaching for my identification," Raymond announced clearly. "I am moving slowly. Do not shoot." Higgins was thrashing beneath him, spitting curses. "Shoot him, Tate. He's breaking my arm. Kill him." Raymond ignored the man beneath him. He pulled out a leather wallet. It wasn't the Velcro nylon wallet of a drifter. It was black leather, sleek, with a gold badge embedded in the front. He flipped it open. The light caught the gold shield. Above it, the bold blue letters read, "Federal Bureau of Investigation." Tate squinted, her gun lowered an inch. "My name is Special Agent Raymond Banks," he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a razor. I am the Assistant Director of the Criminal Investigative Division out of Washington, D.C. Currently, I am assaulting nobody. I am detaining a suspect who just committed aggravated assault on a minor and deprivation of rights under color of law. He looked down at Higgins, whose thrashing had suddenly stopped. Now, Raymond whispered to the man beneath his knee, you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start using it. If the fight was explosive, the aftermath was a suffocating, bureaucratic fog. 10 minutes later, Betty's diner looked like a disaster zone. But instead of ambulances, the parking lot was filled with 4 sheriff's department cruisers, their lights painting the wet pavement in strobes of red and blue. Raymond had allowed Higgins to stand up, though he kept the sergeant's own handcuffs on him. Higgins was sitting in a booth, his face purple with rage and humiliation, barking orders that nobody was following. Schuyler was sitting with Raymond, who was examining the boy's wrists. They were bruised, starting to swell. The door banged open. Enter Sheriff Shelby, Iron Brody. Brody was the kind of lawman movies were made about. 60 years old, white cowboy hat, a starched tan uniform that strained against a gut built on fried chicken and sweet tea. He walked with a swagger that said he owned every inch of dirt in Preston Creek. He marched straight to Higgins, ignored him, and turned to Raymond. "All right," Brody boomed, hooking his thumbs into his belt. "Who's the Fed?" Raymond stood up. He had taken off the muddy jacket. Underneath, he wore a simple black t-shirt that showed he was in dangerous shape for a man in his 40s. "That would be me, Sheriff. Agent Banks." Brody looked him up and down, chewing on a toothpick. He didn't look impressed. "Banks, right. My deputy tells me you assaulted one of my sergeants and hijacked a crime scene." "Your sergeant," Raymond said, pointing to the sullen Higgins, "assaulted a minor without probable cause, destroyed private property, and attempted to effect an unlawful arrest. I interceded." Brody laughed. It was a dry, dismissive sound. "Unlawful arrest? Son, you're not in D.C. anymore. You're in Preston Creek. Probable cause is what I say it is. And Higgins here says your boy was in possession of stolen goods." "My laptop," Schuyler spoke up, his voice small. "It's not stolen, it's mine." Brody didn't even look at the kid. He stepped closer to Raymond, invading his personal space. "Here's how this works, Agent Banks. I don't care if you're J. Edgar Hoover's ghost. You don't come into my town and put cuffs on my men. Now, you're going to unlock Higgins. You're going to apologize. And then you're going to get in your car and drive until you hit the state line. If you do that, I won't charge you with assaulting an officer." Raymond smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a shark that just smelled blood in the water. "Sheriff," Raymond said, checking his watch, "I think you're under the impression that this is a negotiation. It isn't." "Is that so?" Brody's hand drifted toward his radio. "You mentioned the stolen goods," Raymond continued, walking over to the shattered remains of the MacBook Pro on the floor. He picked it up. "This computer belongs to the United States government. It was issued to my son for his use, but the property tag on the bottom clearly states, property of FBI, Cybersecurity Division." Brody's eyes flicked to the laptop. He saw the silver tag. He swallowed. "Furthermore," Raymond said, turning back to face the room, "Officer Tate here was wearing a body camera. I noticed Sergeant Higgins's camera was conveniently turned off or broken, but Tate's was running. I've already seized the SD card as evidence." Tate looked down at her shoes, refusing to meet the sheriff's eyes. "And lastly," Raymond said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly low volume, "I wasn't in Preston Creek on vacation, Sheriff. I was passing through on my way to a field office to oversee a task force regarding interstate corruption and civil rights violations in rural precincts. I was looking for a case study. I think I just found one. Brody's face went pale. The toothpick fell out of his mouth. You're bluffing, Brody stammered. You can't just come in here and take over. I already have, Raymond said. He pulled a cell phone from his pocket. I made a call 5 minutes ago to the Department of Justice, specifically to Assistant Attorney General David Thorne. He's very interested in why a local sheriff is threatening a federal agent who just stopped a violent assault on a child. As if on cue, the phone in the diner, the landline behind the counter, rang. It was a loud, jarring, mechanical ring that made everyone jump. Betty picked it up, her hand shaking. She listened for a second, her eyes going wide. She held the receiver out toward the sheriff. "Sheriff Brody?" Betty whispered, her voice trembling. It's for you. He says he's the governor." Brody stared at the phone like it was a rattlesnake. He looked at Higgins, who was now slumped in the booth, realizing the gravity of his mistake. He looked at Skylar, the kid they had dismissed as a nobody. And finally, he looked at Raymond Banks. Raymond gestured to the phone. "Take it, Sheriff. I think he wants to discuss your retirement plans." The drama was far from over. The legal system in Preston Creek was a tangled web of favors and handshakes, and Sheriff Brody wasn't going down without a fight. But he had just realized that the black kid in the diner wasn't a victim he could silence. He was the bait in a trap that had just snapped shut on the entire department. Higgins stood up, the cuffs clinking. "Sheriff, don't listen to him. We can fix this. We just need to—" "Shut up, Bill," Brody snapped, grabbing the phone. "Hello? Yes, Governor. Yes, sir. I understand." "No, sir, Raymond walked over to Skylar and put a hand on his shoulder. "You okay?" "Yeah," Skylar whispered, looking at his dad with a mix of awe and shock. "Dad, are you really investigating them?" Raymond looked at the sheriff, sweating into the receiver, then back at his son. He winked. "I am now." The dawn over Preston Creek brought no warmth, only a cold, grey light that exposed the cracks in the town's facade. Betty's diner was closed, wrapped in yellow crime scene tape that fluttered in the wind. But the real action had moved to the Preston Creek Municipal Building, a brick fortress that smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. Raymond Banks sat in an interrogation room. But he wasn't the one handcuffed to the table. Across from him sat Officer Jenny Tate. She was no longer wearing her uniform. She wore a frantic, hollow expression, her hands gripping a styrofoam cup of water, as if it were an anchor, keeping her from drifting away. The room was crowded. Standing behind Raymond were two men in dark suits, agents from the FBI field office who had arrived by helicopter at 3 a.m. They were silent, efficient, and terrifyingly professional. "You're at a crossroads, Jenny," Raymond said softly. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. He had the weight of the federal government behind him. Right now, the narrative is that you were an accomplice to a civil rights violation, assault on a minor, and conspiracy to falsify evidence. That carries a sentence of 10 to 15 years. Tate sobbed, a dry, hitching sound. "I didn't touch him. I told Higgins to stop." "But you didn't stop him," Raymond countered, leaning in. "And that's not what I'm interested in. I want to know why." "Why what? Why did Higgins target a 14-year-old boy for a laptop? I've run Higgins' financials. He's on a sergeant's salary, but he owns a boat, a vacation home in Florida, and 3 rental properties. That's not overtime pay, Jenny. That's dirty money." Tate looked at the mirror on the wall, knowing Sheriff Brody was likely on the other side, or wishing he was. She looked back at Raymond. The fear of her boss was warring with the fear of prison. It's the asset forfeiture program, she whispered. Raymond's eyes narrowed. Civil asset forfeiture, go on. It's how the department makes budget, Tate spilled, the words tumbling out like water from a broken dam. Sheriff Brody. He set quotas, not for tickets, but for seizures. We look for out-of-towners, rentals, nice cars, people passing through who can't afford to stay and fight a court case. We pull them over for anything. A busted tail light, crossing the center line. If they have cash, we seize it as suspected drug proceeds. If they have expensive electronics, we take them. And then nothing, Tate said, tears streaming down her face. They sign a waiver to avoid jail and we keep the stuff. The sheriff auctions it off or keeps the cash. It's a machine, Agent Banks. Higgins, he saw your son. He saw the headphones and the Mac. He didn't see a kid. He saw a quick hit, a $5,000 seizure to pad the monthly stats. Raymond sat back, a cold fury settling in his gut. It wasn't just racism, it was predation. They were highwaymen with badges, robbing travelers to fund their retirement accounts. And they had tried to rob the son of the assistant director of the CID. Who else knows? Raymond asked. Everyone, Tate whispered. The sheriff, the deputies. The town judge signs the forfeiture orders without even reading them. Judge Harrison, he gets a kickback. The door to the interrogation room flew open. Sheriff Brody stood there, his face a mask of red-hot anger. He wasn't wearing his hat now. This interview is over. Officer Tate has not waived her right to counsel. You get the hell out of my station, Banks. Raymond stood up slowly. He turned to the two agents behind him. Agent Miller, Agent Cole, Raymond said calmly. Please place Sheriff Brody under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, and obstruction of justice. Brody's jaw dropped. You can't do that. I'm the sheriff. Not anymore, Raymond said, walking past him. You're a suspect. As Miller and Cole moved to cuff the screaming sheriff, Raymond walked out into the bullpen. He pulled out his phone. He had one more call to make, and this one was personal. He dialed a number in New York City. Samantha, Raymond said when the line connected. Ray? The voice on the other end was sharp, intelligent, and immediate. I heard you were in some podunk town. Everything okay? No, Raymond said, watching deputies being disarmed by federal agents. I need the shark. I need you to fly down here. We're going to file a Section 1983 civil rights lawsuit that will bankrupt this entire county. And I want you to represent Schuyler. Samantha Cole, the most feared civil litigator on the East Coast, didn't ask for details. She just asked one question. How much do you want to take them for? Everything, Raymond said. 3 months later. The stifling heat of the Preston Creek courthouse was made worse by the press bodies packed into the gallery. It wasn't just local news anymore. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, trucks from every major network were parked on the lawn, their satellite dishes pointed at the sky like white flowers praying for a signal. The case of Schuyler Banks versus Preston Creek County had become a national firestorm. The narrative had shifted. It wasn't just about a cop hitting a kid. It was about the Preston Creek shakedown. After Jenny Tate's confession, the FBI had uncovered over 400 cases of illegal seizure, families robbed of their vacation money, small business owners stripped of their payroll cash, lives ruined by Higgins and Brody to buy base boats and lift kits. But the defense was fighting dirty. Inside the courtroom, the defense attorney for the county, a slick man named Richard Sterling, was trying to destroy Schuyler's character. Now, Schuyler, Sterling said, pacing in front of the witness stand. Schuyler looked different now. The cast was off his arm, but he looked older, more tired. You say you were just doing homework. But isn't it true that the file found on your backup drive contained encrypted software often used by hackers? Objection. Samantha Cole stood up. She was a striking woman in a Navy power suit, her presence commanding the room. Relevance. The plaintiff is a computer science student. Having coding tools is not a crime. Sustained, Judge Alistair Thorne ruled. Thorne was a federal judge brought in from out of state because every local judge was implicated in the scandal. I'm just trying to establish the mindset of the officer, Sterling smirked. Sergeant Higgins believed he was stopping a cyber criminal. He feared for the safety of the community. He feared a 14-year-old with a history textbook, Samantha shot back. Your Honor, Sterling pivoted. We move to dismiss the body cam footage from evidence. We argue that the footage was obtained illegally by Agent Banks, who seized the SD card without a warrant at the scene. This was their Hail Mary. Without the video, it was Higgins' word against Schuyler's. And in a jury trial, sometimes the badge still won. The courtroom held its breath. Raymond sat in the front row, his knuckles white as he gripped the bench. If the video was tossed, the case could crumble. Judge Thorne adjusted his glasses. Mr. Sterling, under normal circumstances, you might have a point about the chain of custody. However, the judge picked up a piece of paper. It appears the plaintiff, Schuyler Banks, has rendered your argument moot. Sterling blinked. I don't understand. Samantha Cole smiled. It was the smile of a wolf who had just trapped a rabbit. Your Honor, if I may. Proceed, Miss Cole. Samantha turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, the defense wants you to believe that the only record of that night was on a plastic SD card. They want you to believe that if they hide that card, the truth disappears. But they forgot who they were dealing with. She pointed at Schuyler. Schuyler wasn't just writing a paper on the Industrial Revolution. He was testing a Python script he wrote for a cloud-based backup protocol. The moment Sergeant Higgins shattered his laptop, the internal gyroscope triggered an emergency upload of all active peripherals. Samantha turned to the large screen mounted on the wall. The laptop's webcam was on. It recorded everything, and it didn't save to the hard drive. It uploaded directly to a secure server in Virginia. This isn't the body cam footage, Mr. Sterling. This is the victim's point of view. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Sterling went pale. Play it, the judge ordered. The screen flickered to life. The angle was low, looking up from the table. The quality was crystal clear 4K. The jury watched in high-definition horror. They saw Higgins's face, distorted with rage, leaning over the camera. I don't care who your daddy is unless he's down here to bail your ass out. They heard the crunch of the impact as the laptop was thrown. Then the audio continued. They heard the sickening thud of Schuyler being slammed into the table. They heard a child crying for his father. And then the most damning part. After Raymond had intervened and the scene had settled, the laptop, still recording from the floor, captured a whisper between Higgins and Sheriff Brody before they realized the extent of the situation. The audio hissed, then cleared. Brody's voice. Just charge the kid with resisting. We'll keep the computer. My nephew needs a new one for college. Higgins' voice. Done. Kid's a nobody anyway. Who's going to believe him? The video ended. The silence in the courtroom was heavy, absolute, and final. Samantha Cole didn't say a word. She just looked at the jury. 3 jurors were wiping tears from their eyes. The jury foreman, a stern-faced mechanic, looked at Higgins, who was sitting at the defense table, with a look of pure disgust. Richard Sterling slumped in his chair. He started packing his briefcase before the judge even dismissed the jury for deliberation. He knew it was over. Hard karma, Raymond whispered to himself. It wasn't just a lawsuit anymore. It was an execution of a corrupt system. The verdict came back in record time, less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts for Higgins, liable for the county. The jury awarded Schuyler Banks $12 million in damages. But the money wasn't the headline. The headline was the indictments that followed. Sheriff Brody, Sergeant Higgins, Judge Harrison, and 6 other deputies were indicted on federal RICO charges. As they walked out of the courthouse, the steps were flooded with reporters. Flashes popped like lightning. "Schuyler! Schuyler!" a reporter from the Times shouted. "What are you going to do with the money?" Schuyler stood next to his father. He looked at the cameras, then at the scarred screen of his new laptop. "I'm going to start a foundation," Schuyler said, his voice steady, "for legal defense, so that the next time a bully with a badge tries to steal from a nobody, they'll find out that nobody is alone." Raymond put his arm around his son. They walked down the steps, the crowd parting for them. But as they reached the bottom of the stairs, a black sedan pulled up. The back window rolled down. A man in a sharp suit looked out. It was Assistant Attorney General David Thorne. He beckoned Raymond over. "Great win, Ray," Thorne said, his face grim. "But we have a problem." "What problem?" Raymond asked, the joy of the victory instantly dampening. "We dug into Higgins's phone records like you asked," Thorne said, lowering his voice. "The orders for the seizures? The pressure to hit the quotas? It wasn't coming from Sheriff Brody." Raymond froze. "Who was it coming from?" Thorne handed Raymond a file. "Brody was just a middleman. The money was being funneled up, way up, to the governor's re-election campaign." Raymond looked at the file. The hard karma hadn't finished its meal yet. It had just finished the appetizer. The Grand Hotel ballroom in the state capital was a world away from the grease-stained linoleum of Betty's diner. Here, the air didn't smell of stale coffee and rain. It smelled of roasted duck, expensive perfume, and the crisp metallic scent of old money. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a golden, forgiving light over the state's elite. Governor Edward Caldwell stood at the center of it all, basking in the adulation. He was a man who had built a career on a perfectly whiter-than-white smile and a handshake that felt like a contract. Tonight was his victory lap. The polls had just closed, and the early numbers showed him cruising toward a landslide re-election. He gripped the podium with manicured hands, leaning into the microphone as 1,000 donors fell silent. "My friends!" Caldwell boomed, his voice practicing the cadence of a preacher. "They told us we couldn't clean up this state. They told us that law and order was a relic of the past. But look at us now. We have funded our police. We have taken the handcuffs off our heroes in blue and put them where they belong, on the criminals." The room erupted in polite, wealthy applause. Waiters in white gloves moved silently through the crowd, topping off champagne flutes. Caldwell beamed, raising a glass. "We are building a fortress of safety," he continued, his voice rising. "A state where the law is absolute, and where no one is above the—" He never finished the sentence. The heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom didn't just open. They were thrown wide with a force that rattled the hinges. The sound of the live jazz band died instantly, dissolving into a discordant squeak of a saxophone. A hush swept through the room, starting at the back and rolling forward like a cold wave. 20 men and women strode into the room. They weren't wearing the tuxedos and evening gowns of the guests. They wore navy blue windbreakers with bold yellow lettering that left no room for interpretation. FBI. In the center of the phalanx walked Raymond Banks. He had traded his muddy Carhartt jacket for a charcoal suit that fit his frame like armor. He didn't look like a party guest. He looked like a natural disaster in a tie. His eyes were fixed on the stage, unblinking, ignoring the sea of stunned faces turning to watch him. Governor Caldwell squinted against the glare of the spotlights, his smile faltering. He shielded his eyes with one hand. "Excuse me, this is a private event. Security. Get these people out of here." Two private security guards near the entrance stepped forward, chests puffed out. They took one look at the tactical gear and the federal badges of the agents flanking Raymond, and wisely decided that they weren't being paid enough to die tonight. They stepped back, melting into the wallpaper. "Security has been relieved, Governor," Raymond announced. His voice wasn't shouted, yet it carried to the back of the room, cutting through the silence with terrifying clarity. He began to walk down the center aisle. The crowd parted instinctively, a red sea of velvet and silk separating for the man who had come to settle a debt. Caldwell's face went from confused to indignant. He recognized the man now, the pest from Preston Creek, the fly in the ointment. "You," Caldwell sneered, gripping the podium until his knuckles turned white. "You're that agent. Banks, isn't it? You're a long way from home, agent, and you are woefully out of your jurisdiction." Raymond didn't stop walking until he reached the base of the stage. He looked up at the governor, holding a thick manila file in his hand. The file looked innocent enough, but to those who knew what to look for, it was heavier than a loaded gun. "Corruption has no jurisdiction, Edward," Raymond said calmly. He climbed the stairs to the stage, his footsteps heavy and deliberate on the hollow wood. He stood next to the governor, towering over him, invading the politician's carefully constructed bubble of invincibility. "This is an outrage," Caldwell hissed, leaning away from the microphone so the room wouldn't hear his panic. "I am the governor of this state. You come into my celebration, ruin my night. I will have your badge for this. I will have your pension." "You can try," Raymond replied, his voice level. He lifted the file and tapped it against the governor's chest. "But you're going to be busy explaining the contents of this." "What is that?" "It's the money trail, Governor. We traced it, all of it." Raymond turned slightly, addressing the room, ensuring the press cameras at the back were capturing every word. "The civil asset forfeiture funds from Preston Creek, the seizures from 4 other counties. We found the shell companies in the Caymans. We found the kickbacks to your campaign manager. We found the wire transfers that paid for this ballroom, for that champagne, and for the silence of 3 district judges." A gasp went through the crowd. The donors began to whisper, taking small steps backward, distancing themselves from the man on stage as if he were suddenly radioactive. "Lies!" Caldwell shouted, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. "These are political lies." "They are bank statements," Raymond corrected him. "And they show that you didn't just support the police. You turned them into highwaymen. You built a machine to grind down travelers, the poor and the defenseless, all to fund your ambition. You thought you were untouchable because you only targeted nobodies." Raymond leaned in close, his eyes burning with a cold, hard fire. "But then your machine made a mistake. It tried to grind down my son." Raymond signaled to the agents waiting in the wings. "Take him." 2 federal agents moved in with practiced efficiency. They spun the governor around. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut was loud, sharp, and final. "You can't do this!" Caldwell shrieked, his dignity evaporating. "I am the governor. Do you know who I am?" "Edward Caldwell," Raymond said, watching the man struggle. "You are under arrest for racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy to deprive civil rights. And, Governor, you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start using it." As the agents dragged the screaming politician off the stage, the flashbulbs of the press cameras exploded like a lightning storm. The image of the handcuffed governor would be on the front page of every paper in the country by morning. Raymond didn't watch him go. He turned and walked back down the aisle, the crowd staring at him with a mixture of fear and awe. He walked out the double doors, leaving the ruined party behind him. Outside, the night air was cool and clean. The sirens were distant now. Waiting at the curb was a black sedan. The window rolled down. Schuyler sat in the passenger seat, the glow of his laptop illuminating his face. He looked up, searching his father's eyes. "Did you get him?" Schuyler asked quietly. Raymond stopped, or he took a deep breath, letting the tension of the last 6 months finally drain from his shoulders. He looked at the stars, then back at his son. "Yeah, kid," Raymond smiled, a genuine, tired smile. "We got him. We got them all. The real life. 5 years is a long time in politics, but in a small town, it's a lifetime. Preston Creek is unrecognizable today. The sheriff's department was dissolved by the state legislature and rebuilt from the ground up. The predatory speed traps that once lined the highway are gone, replaced by honest signs welcoming travelers. The fear that used to hang over the town like humidity has lifted. Betty's diner is still there, sitting on the side of the road like a beacon. Betty herself retired to Florida, buying a condo with a substantial whistleblower settlement. The new owner, a young woman named Sarah, keeps the coffee hot and the floors clean. But if you walk to the back, to the booth farthest from the door, you'll see a small brass plaque screwed into the wall. It reads simply, "In this booth, justice was served. 226. Schuyler Banks never forgot that night, but he didn't let it break him. He didn't become a cop, and he didn't become a lawyer. He graduated from MIT at the top of his class with a double major in computer science and sociology. He used his settlement money to found a non-profit organization called the Open Road Initiative. They build encryption apps for activists and maintain a massive, user-updated database that helps travelers identify illegal speed traps and report police misconduct in real time. He works out of a glass office in Boston, but he still wears oversized grey hoodies, and he still listens to lo-fi hip-hop while he codes. The only difference is that now he doesn't walk with his head down. He walks with the confidence of a man who knows he can change the world because he's already done it once. And Raymond? Raymond turned in his badge a year after the Caldwell verdict. He said he had seen enough of the dark side of the world and wanted to enjoy a little bit of the light. He spends his days fishing on a quiet lake and working as a special consultant for the Innocence Project, helping to free people who were wrongfully convicted by corrupt systems. But old habits die hard. Every Tuesday evening, rain or shine, Raymond drives to a local diner near his house. He orders a black coffee and a slice of pie. He sits in the back booth, opens a book, and he waits. He isn't paranoid. He isn't afraid. He just watches the door. One evening, a new waitress poured his refill and asked, "Mr. Banks, I've always wondered, why do you always sit facing the entrance? You never look at the view." Raymond paused. He looked at the door, then down at his coffee. He thought about a rainy night in Preston Creek. He thought about a shattered laptop and a terrified boy. He thought about how thin the line really is between a peaceful night and a nightmare. He looked up at the waitress and offered a warm, knowing smile. "It's nothing to worry about," he said softly. "I'm just making sure the bad guys know this seat is taken." It cost the taxpayers of the state over $50 million in lawsuits. It cost a governor his career, his legacy, and his freedom. And it cost a sheriff his badge, all because one arrogant officer looked at a young black boy in a diner and decided he was an easy target. They thought Schuyler Banks was powerless because he was alone. They didn't know that power isn't about the badge on your chest or the gun on your hip. It's about the truth on your side, and a father who will burn the world down to protect his son. In the end, Sergeant Higgins got his wish. He wanted to make an arrest that would be remembered forever. And he did. He just never expected to be the one in handcuffs. What an incredible journey of justice and karma. It really makes you think about who is watching when you think you're alone. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It really helps the algorithm share this story with more people. And if you want more stories where the underdog wins and corrupt bullies get exactly what they deserve, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. I have a question for you. If you were in that diner and saw Officer Higgins harassing Skylar, would you have stepped in, or would you have been too afraid to speak up? Let me know your honest answer in the comments below. I read every single one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.